Some numbers this morning. The US GDP is roughly $25 to $27 trillion, depending on who you
A
ask.
colossal number.
It is. It's this huge engine of consumer spending. And for a lot of people outside the US, looking at that number, it kind of feels like looking at a party through a soundproof glass window.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
You can see the activity, you can see the money changing hands, but you just cannot find the door.
That's the velvet rope of the global economy, right? It's that gatekeeping anxiety.
Exactly. And that is what we are digging into today. The perception, and let's be honest, the historical reality that the American market is this exclusive club.
Yeah.
If you don't have a U.S. passport or a massive legal team or, a skyscraper in Manhattan, you're not getting in.
That has been the prevailing wisdom for decades. But today, we're doing a deep dive into a source that claims the door isn't locked. We've just been pushing when we should be pulling. We're looking at an excerpt from the Global Founders Guide to Remote U.S. Incorporation, and specifically, we are going to analyze a scripted debate within that guide between two characters.
Right, Rahul and Arjun.
Rahul, who's the skeptic, he represents all those traditional fears. And then Arjun, the informed entrepreneur who says, no, I have the keys to the castle.
So the mission today is pretty straightforward. We need to see if this is actually real.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to try and dismantle the myths around non-resident U.S. business formation. Because if the source is right, the impossible is, well, it's actually accessible.
But before we get to the solution, we have to respect the problem. Let's talk about Rahul.
Yeah, let's start there.
Rahul is a great character because he isn't cynical for no reason. He's exhausted. The source introduces him as someone who's been researching for weeks. He's just hit a wall.
I think anyone who's ever tried to navigate a foreign bureaucracy can feel for Rahul.
Oh, completely.
You fall into that Google rabbit hole at 2 in the morning. You have 40 tabs open. Half of them contradict the other half. And you end up convinced you're going to go to jail if you fill out the wrong form.
It is the paralysis of information overload. And Rahul has 4 specific fears. Let's call them the 4 horsemen of his anxiety.
Okay.
First, physical presence. He believes you must be physically standing on U.S. soil to start a U.S. company.
Which, logically that makes sense. If I want to open a bakery in Paris, I probably need to be in Paris.
Right. Second is the residential address requirement. He assumes you need a lease, a utility bill, something that proves you live there.
Okay.
Third is the paperwork, specifically the fear of endless, expensive legal filings. And fourth, and this is the big one, is the identity crisis.
Mm-hmm.
He says it feels like this is only meant for U.S. citizens.
That line jumped out at me.
Okay.
Only meant for U.S. citizens. He's not just worried about logistics. He feels excluded by design. And honestly, can you blame him? When you hear terms like registered agent, articles of organization, or EI compliance, that just sounds like the language of the elite.
It's exclusionary language. Rahul actually says, I always thought this was something only big companies or rich founders could do.
The rich founder syndrome.
That's it. He assumes that unless he has $50,000 to drop on a retainer for a corporate law firm, he's out of the game.
And the source points out that his confusion comes from a really specific approach, the DIY method.
Exactly, the do-it-yourself nightmare. The source validates this. It says, if you try to navigate the Delaware Division of Corporations website or the IRS portal on your own, with no context, you will be overwhelmed. It's designed for lawyers, not for humans.
So Rahul is standing at the bottom of this mountain. He thinks he needs a plane ticket, a visa, an apartment, and a law degree just to sell his software to American clients.
And this is where the narrative just pivots. Enter Arjun.
The guy with the map. Okay, so Arjun comes in and basically tells Rahul that his information is, from 1995?
Mm-hmm.
What's the core revelation here?
The revelation is that geography has been decoupled from legality. The source states it explicitly. Non-U.S. residents can open a US LLC completely remotely.
Completely remotely.
You do not need to travel. You don't need a visa. You do not need to be a citizen.
Okay, I have to play devil's advocate here.
Yeah?
Completely remotely sounds great, but does that mean I just click a button and I'm a corporation? Because Rahul, and I'm with him on this, says that sounds too good to be true.
Mm.
Usually when things are that easy, it's a scam.
And that's healthy skepticism. It's essential here. It isn't magic. It is a specific legal process using a specific tool. Arjun introduces a platform called Instantly.one.
Okay.
But we need to look under the hood. We shouldn't just accept that it works. We need to understand how it bypasses the barriers that Rahul listed.
Right. Let's take the physical address barrier. You said you don't need to live there.
Mm-hmm.
But surely the government needs to send mail somewhere.
Of course.
You can't just have a company floating in the ether.
And you hit on a critical distinction that trips up almost everyone, including Rahul. There is a difference between a business address and a registered agent.
Okay, break that down for us.
A registered agent is a statutory requirement. Every LLC formed in the U.S., whether it's Delaware, Wyoming, New Mexico, must have a registered agent with a physical address in that state open during business hours.
And their only job is to do what?
Their only job is to accept service of process. So basically, lawsuits or official state notices.
So if someone sues your company, the guy in the suit shows up at the registered agent's door, not your house in London or Lagos.
Precisely. And this is what services like Instantly.one provide. They act as that legal, physical interface. They satisfy the state requirement, so you don't have to fly to Dover, Delaware, and rent an office just to receive one envelope a year.
Okay, that solves the presence issue. But what about the formation itself? Rahul is terrified of the paperwork.
Formation is actually the easiest part mechanically. It involves filing articles of organization with the state. The platform handles this digitally. They take your information, format it into the state's required structure, and file it. That creates the birth certificate of the company.
So now you have a company. But here is where we get to the boss fight. The barrier that stops 90% of people who try to do this alone.
The tax ID?
The dreaded EIN. In the dialogue, Rahul asks, don't you need a social security number to get an EIN? And this is a massive sticking point. I think most people assume that if you don't have an SSN, you simply cannot exist in the U.S. tax system.
That is the most common misconception. An EIN is an employer identification number. It's the social security number for the business entity, not the person.
Yeah.
And you need it to open a bank account, hire people, pay taxes.
But the application form literally asks for an SSN. I've seen it.
And that is why the online application fails for non-residents. If you are a U.S. citizen, you go to the IRS website, punch in your SSN, you get your EIN instantly. It's 5 minutes.
But if you're a non-resident without an SSN,
you cannot use that online portal.
So what do? Just give up?
No. You have to use a specific process involving Form SS4, and you have to file it in a way that feels, well, incredibly archaic.
Please don't tell me it involves a fax machine.
I am afraid so.
No.
The IRS, for this specific non-resident process, lives in a bit of a timeless void. You generally have to fax the Form SS4 to the IRS or mail it, and then, and this is the painful part, you wait.
You wait? For how long?
It can take weeks, sometimes a month or more, depending on their backlog, and this is where the intermediary value proposition actually makes sense. Rahul is worried about complexity.
Yeah.
The complexity isn't the law, it's the logistics.
So when Arjun says Instantly.one handles the EIN, they aren't using some magic wand.
Yeah.
They're literally filling out the SS4, maybe acting as a third-party designee, and managing that fax and mail interaction with the IRS so the founder doesn't have to buy a fax machine in 2026?
Exactly. They bridge the gap between the digital world and the IRS paper world. They know which box to check so the form doesn't get rejected. Because if you mess up one line on that SS4, you wait 4 weeks just to get a rejection letter, and then you have to start all over again.
That sounds like an absolute nightmare. No wonder Rahul was depressed.
It is a nightmare if you don't know the path. But Arjun's point is that the path exists. The lack of an SSN is a speed bump, not a brick wall.
Okay, so let's assume we've crossed the bridge. We used the service, we got the registered agent, we waited the few weeks, and boom, we have the EIN. We are now the proud owners of a US LLC. My question is, so what?
That is the why question.
Yeah, why go through all the fax machine trouble? Is it just for vanity? Look, I have a Delaware company.
Far from it. The source details 3 or 4 massive strategic advantages. The first, and arguably the most critical for a freelancer or a SaaS founder, is banking and payments.
Right, because if I'm a graphic designer in a country with strict banking controls, getting paid by a client in New York is a huge headache.
It's often impossible. Many global payment gateways think Stripe or specific features of PayPal. They're region-locked. If you're in a country that isn't supported, you are cut off from the global digital economy.
You're stuck with wire transfers, which are expensive and slow.
But wait, just having the LLC doesn't automatically give you a bank account, does it? I've heard banking is actually harder than the incorporation part.
You are absolutely right to flag that. The LLC plus the EIN is the key to the door, but you still have to walk through it.
So traditional banks, your Chases, your Bank of Americas, they usually require you to walk into a branch to open an account. And that brings us back to the flight ticket problem.
So we are back to square one.
Not quite. This is where the whole fintech revolution comes in. The source implies that once you have that US entity and the EIN, you gain access to digital-first banks platforms like Mercury or Brex.
Ah,
These institutions are designed for startups. They allow for remote account opening if, then this is a big if only, if you have the valid US incorporation papers and the EIN.
I see. So the LLC is the prerequisite for the bank account, and the bank account is the prerequisite for the payment gateway.
Exactly. It unlocks the infrastructure. Suddenly, you can accept credit card payments from a customer in California just as easily as a local business could. You are playing on the same field.
Which leads to the second benefit the source mentions, credibility.
This is huge. Imagine you are a corporate client in Chicago looking to hire a software development agency. You get two proposals. One asks you to wire money to a personal account in a country you're unfamiliar with.
Mm-hmm.
The other sends you a professional invoice from Rahul Tech Solutions LLC, a Delaware company with a U.S. bank account.
The friction just disappears.
Yeah.
It's not just about trust. It's about corporate procurement departments. They have rules. It's so much easier for them to pay a U.S. vendor.
It signals legitimacy. It signals permanence. It tells the client, I am subject to the same commercial laws you are. It just lowers the perceived risk of doing business with you.
And what about investment? The source briefly touches on SaaS founders. If I'm building the next big app in my bedroom in, say, Vietnam, and I want U.S. venture capital,
then a Delaware C Corp is almost non-negotiable. U.S. investors, they generally do not want to navigate foreign tax laws. They want to invest in a Delaware entity. So even if you don't need the bank account, if you want the investment, you need the structure.
So we've moved from Rahul's depressed researcher phase, where he thought he was excluded because he wasn't rich or American, to the Argent reality, where he realizes the barriers are mostly administrative, not legal.
And that is a profound shift. The source contrasts struggling alone versus efficient execution. Rahul was trying to be his own lawyer, his own registered agent, and his own tax expert. That's just a recipe for failure.
It reminds me of the specific line in the text where Rahul says that actually changes everything.
Yes.
It wasn't just that he learned how to fill out a form. His entire view of his career potential expanded. He realized he wasn't limited to his local market anymore.
It creates a leveling of the playing field. The geographic lottery of where you were born matters less now than it ever has in history, at least for digital businesses.
But I want to circle back to one thing before we wrap up. We've talked about how easy the service makes it. But let's be real for a second. Is it set it and forget it?
I'm so glad you asked that, because that is the trap. The source focuses on formation, which is just the starting line. But running a business involves maintenance.
Right.
You have to file annual franchise tax reports. You have to renew your registered agent service. You have to file U.S. tax returns like Form 5472 for foreign-owned LLCs.
And the penalties for missing those forms are pretty nasty, right?
$25,000 per year plus per form for some of these failures. So while the access is democratized, the responsibility is very real. Instantly.one helps you start, and they help with compliance reminders. But you cannot just open the LLC and ignore it. You are entering a serious legal system.
That's a crucial reality check. The velvet rope is down, but you still have to follow the dress code once you're inside the club.
That is a perfect analogy.
So let's recap the journey we've taken today. We started with the economic power of the U.S. market and the, deep frustration of being locked out.
We validated Rahul's fears, the confusion about physical presence versus legal presence, and the intimidation of the IRS.
Then we unpacked the Argent solution, specifically how modern tools like Instantly.one act as the interface. They handle the state filing, they provide the registered agent, and most importantly, they navigate the fax machine era bureaucracy of the IRS to get that EIN.
And we clarified the payout. It's not just a vanity project. It's about unlocking fintech banking, accessing global payment rails like Stripe, and signaling credibility to high-value clients.
The takeaway from the source material is really summarized in its closing narration. It says something like, opening a US LLC as a non-resident may seem complex at first, but with modern services, entrepreneurs worldwide can build and manage a U.S. business without leaving their home country.
It fundamentally decouples talent from location. The legal entity lives in America, the brain lives wherever it wants.
And that leads me to a final thought for you, the listener. We've spent this time dismantling a barrier that most people think is impossible to cross without $1 million or a green card. We proved that the borders for business are much more porous than the borders for people, provided you have the right information.
It makes you wonder what other rules we follow that are actually just outdated assumptions.
Exactly. So here is the question to mull over. What other impossible wall in your career, whether it's accessing a market, getting a credential, reaching a certain type of client, is actually just a curtain waiting for the right tool to pull it back? Are you stopping at a red light that turned green 5 years ago?
That is the question. Sometimes the biggest gatekeeper is just our own lack of updated data.
Thanks for diving in with us.
Always a pleasure.
We'll see you on the next deep dive.